guys, it's Sam and this is my March wrap-up. I'm filming this a little early because I am moving, so this is one of the last videos that you'll see in this space. I know, but I'm really excited for the new space. But I'm reading Empire of Gold while moving and I'm not gonna be finishing that before the move. So these are the books that I read really in only like 3 weeks of March, which is a lot because I read 7 books. Most of these I have full reviews for or have reviews coming up for them. So if you want more in-depth thoughts on almost all of these, then you can check those reviews out. For any books that I don't do video reviews for, there will be auto reviews on the Bibliothecary. So if you want to check that out for any of the books that I haven't done full reviews for here, I will link that on the screen. The first book that I finished this month was The House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in her adult urban fantasy series, so this takes place in a city that has all kinds of paranormal magical creatures, fae, angels, demons, where everything, all that. And this follows our main character, Bryce, who is a half fae, and she gets pulled into a murder investigation and she gets paired up with this angel hunt, and everything kind of goes from there. That is like very basic, but I have done a full review as well as a in-depth vlog for this book that I did all on TikTok. So I have that compiled here. I will link the review on the screen. This was the first Sarah J. Maas book that I had read since ACOWAR came out, so it had been quite some time, and this was getting a lot of hype, has had a lot of hype, and then the second book was coming out and everyone on TikTok was talking about it. So I kind of was having some FOMO and decided to read this. As a reading experience, mixed bag. I had more fun with it because I was making content for it, but there were some things that I liked and a lot of things that I didn't. I enjoyed the world, although it's not my favorite urban fantasy world by any means. I think other authors do this better, but I did like the world and some of that. Like, I just like any book that has a ton of magical creatures in it. The characters were also hit and miss for me. I liked our main characters generally, but I would say the side characters are the best, and I think that's just kind of true for Sarah J. Maas books anyway. Like, my favorite character, who is sort of like a minor main character, is Rune, which is the main character's brother. I adore him. But then all of the other like little side characters also feel way more fleshed out somehow than even the main characters do, although I will say Bryce has her moments that I do really like. The romance in this is also just fine for me. It took me a little bit of time to start actually shipping it, but as you guys know, every Sarah J. Maas book has like a romance focal point as well. And the plot, everyone warned me about this. It took a while to actually like get around to the point. I do think the last part of the book was better, but her books need editing. They just do. There's no reason this needs to be 800 pages. It could be a solid 5, even 6, and would be stronger for it. So things I liked, things I didn't, I gave this between a 3.5 and a 3.75 stars. I then read Iron Widow by Siren J. Zhao. This is the first book in what I think is gonna be a YA sci-fi duology. This follows the main character of Zetienne. It takes place in an Asian-inspired sci-fi kind of world. And in this world, there are mechs that are powered by people's soul magic in male-female pairs. And these mechs are fighting an invading alien force. The problem is this is still a very like sexist, misogynistic society based on like Asian and like Chinese primarily, it seems like, history, but it's not historical sci-fi. It is its own thing. But because of that, the women are most often like almost sacrificed, and the men end up almost like using them as batteries to power these mechs more than anything else. So Zetienne's sister, before the book starts, ends up getting killed by one of these pilots, and so she's going to sort of avenge her and ends up getting caught up in everything there because she's way more powerful than she even could imagine she is. Not only that, but there is a polyamorous sort of like love triangle. I mean, it's not really a love triangle because that implies that they're not all together. They are. So just know that. We have every single potential pairing as far as like enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, rivals to lovers in this polyamorous triad. It's great. I loved this. I've already done a full review for this, so I'll link that on the screen. Don't have much more to say here besides the fact that this was just amazing. There were parts about like the plot and the world building that were a little weak, so I ended up giving it 4 stars and not 5. In my heart and enjoyment level, it was 5 stars. I read this in about 2 days. I loved the character dynamics. I loved our main character Zetienne and her justified feminine rage. Like, it is so just divine feminine rage is the best way to describe this. She hates the society and what it does to women, and she wants to tear it all down, and she has the power to, and it's incredibly cathartic for that reason. I have gotten very used to books where characters are in some of these sexist societies, and although the characters do eventually like work on tearing that down, it takes such a long time, and they're kind of like, they're feeling stuck in it for a while, and they don't necessarily believe in themselves. She from the beginning is like, screw this shit sucks, I hate all of you. And it's just, deep catharsis there. And I do enjoy seeing like all of the characters in the triad and their little relationships and everything. So, and the mech thing is cool. I would say some of the world building stuff is like slightly weak, not a lot is really explained, but that's good if you're like new to sci-fi or don't really like the hard sci-fi stuff. I don't like hard sci-fi, but I could have taken a little bit more there. And parts about the plot pacing wise are like a little bit rushed. So it's not perfect, but it's really good, and I'm looking forward to the next book in this series. I then reread The Silvered Serpents by Rashi Chakshi. This is the second book in the Gilded Wolves series. I read this for the first time a few years ago, so I will link my review for it on the screen. Nothing much has changed. This was just in preparation for me reading the third and final book, which I did this month, so I'll talk about it in a second. This was again 4 stars. I had forgotten a lot of it, and as I've been mentioning, I really need to reread the previous books in the series before continuing to the next books. Even if I feel like I've remembered a lot of it, like in the case of this one, I had forgotten so much. So it's a good thing that I reread it, got like reestablished in the world, and continued on with the series from there. This one was again 4 stars. I then listened to Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This I decided to get an audiobook because I started to read it in physical copy and then realized, ooh, this is reminding me a lot of like Circe by Madeline Miller and some of these, again, Greek retellings that just seem to be better in a audiobook form for me because it is sort of like a oral history kind of thing. This was also my Bibliothecary book pick for last month actually, but I was waiting for the audiobook to come in. So every month my Bibliothecary supporters vote in a poll for a book that I'll read and review, and this is the one that won for last month. And this is just like it says on the tin, this is an Ariadne retelling. This follows Ariadne as well as her sister Phaedra, who also gets POV chapters, and this just follows the myth pretty much the same as you see it. Again, you get a little bit more context of like what those characters might be feeling. However, I was wanting this to be a little bit more like Circe by Madeline Miller, which is not exactly the fairest comparison. I know not everything is going to be like just like Madeline Miller. However, I do think Madeline Miller, in contrast, because they're in kind of the same category, does this kind of stuff better. I feel like the characters are more fleshed out. Here, I felt like the characters were fairly flat, and since this is a character-driven story, you want a little more connection there, and I just always really felt at arm's length. I also felt like you could have maybe mixed things up a little bit or given us even more context or things for some of the things that happened, and I really just didn't get that. So I felt much more at a distance from this story and found myself not really caring about what was happening. The main theme of this is like the gods mess with mortals' lives, and that sucks, particularly women, and like women are very pulled along and have no agency. And while that is true in a lot of ways throughout history, and especially with these Greek myths, it's kind of one of those like, duh, like, yes, more please? So I just felt like it was a little bit too simple for what I was hoping it was going to be, and it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. The writing was very in line with like, okay, it feels like a Greek myth. This feels like just how it was sort of like written back then, whatever. But I just wanted more from it. I then read Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is the first book in the Greenbone saga, which is a adult fantasy, almost like an urban fantasy mafia sort of setting in an Asian setting. So this follows this one crime family, like mafia type family, and they are a family of green bones, which means that they can control jade, and jade is what bestows magical powers onto people, and not everyone has it or can use it. So we're mainly following 3 siblings in that family that are in various positions of power, and as there is like sort of uprisings and things happening between rival clans and things like that. This was our House Salt book pick for the month, so I don't know if the live show is up yet, but it might be. I'm filming this again like way early, so we'll be doing the live show April 8th if it's going up before then. But this was a little bit of, I have some conflicting feelings about this. I am gonna be doing a full review for this as well, which might be up before this. Again, I don't know. But I heard nothing but good things about this, and it's not that this book was bad, it just wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. This is much more of a setup book, so the world is not super complicated, but we do get a lot of like sort of world building and just character setup for how are all the machinations and political machinations happening, sort of what is going on in this world, what kind of things need to take place for this house of cards to crumble so that we can see more in the future books. And so it was much more of that, and I just didn't expect that. So this was like fairly slow to me. I wasn't necessarily super engaged. I like our characters, but I'm not in love with them. And this is a series that I do want to continue, but I don't feel necessarily super compelled to continue right away. And that's a bit of a bummer because I don't want to have to reread this book to move on to the next books in the series. But many people have told me the next 2 books in the series are where it really is like amazing. But it sucks because no one really mentioned that this wasn't as gripping as everyone made it out to be. So yeah, it was still very well written and like interesting, but I expected a little bit more fantasy to it than I really got, and it just to be a little bit more, I don't know, fast-paced and gripping than it necessarily was. So I feel like I was sold something that I didn't quite get. But I still want to read the rest of the series, and I'm hoping I'll like the rest of the series more. I gave this one a solid 3 stars. Then I did finish up the Gilded Wolves series with The Bronze Beast by Roshni Chokshi. This is the 3rd and final book in the series. I will be doing a spoiler-free review for this as well as a discussion coming up, and I liked this. This went in a number of different directions that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but what I really like about this series is that the characters and the world and the plot and everything fit really well together. This does a lot of tropes that I think other books attempt to do really well. I really like the setting and the mythology and how Roshni Chokshi just weaves in lore. She just, as an author, tends to like the same kind of lore that I do, whether it's Greek mythology, some other kind of religious lore, whatever. She weaves a lot in here, not just Greek, like a bunch of things, and I just really like what she likes, so it really works for me. As far as her characters, this is one of the YA books that does found family the best. I mentioned this in a TikTok recently, but everyone talks about like Six of Crows as a found family, blah, blah, blah. I would say that's 3 friends and their boyfriends. This is a true found family. Like, they all are a very integral part. They are all friends, primarily, more so than just like co-workers. I love that. The relationships in here are really good. All of the characters are so like unique and have a special piece in the puzzle of this like unit. They go after like artifacts and things, and they each have a particular set of skills for that, but they also have a set of skills within the friend group that just really works, and they all just like really bounce off each other really well. And then the romantic relationships that form too, I think are like really good and really cute. I like all of them. There's enough angst, there's enough sweetness, like it just kind of has everything. And then as far as the plot is just like one giant puzzle. If you like, I don't know, like Indiana Jones and National Treasure without some of the problematic elements, because these are people that are actually trying to like return some of these artifacts to their actual like where they belong, you know. But if you like that kind of like mystery puzzle, Da Vinci Code, like that kind of go, you know, we're trying to figure out puzzles together, this has that element, and that makes the plot really fun and really fast paced. The one weak point here, and that keeps it from being like a complete 5-star to me, is that the antagonists are like super weak. I would say very similar to like, I would say a Cassandra Clare, the ones that I've read of her series, her antagonists are like super weak. I would say this is like a very similar feel to me, but it's not really about the antagonist, and I would say that the puzzles of the world are more so the barriers than the antagonists are, so I'm pretty much fine with that. There is an epilogue in this book that I will talk about more in my discussion video that I don't necessarily love, but I didn't find that it ruined the book for me in any way. But I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I would say overall the whole series is like 4 to 4.5 star range series for me. So I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. And the last book that I read was Bloody Bones by Laurel K. Hamilton. This is the 5th book in the Anita Blake series, which I'm slowly rereading. This is one of the books that I was also reading for the Magical Readathon Gear Up. That, Jade City, and Bronze Beasts were the 3 books that I was reading for that. So I did finish that this month, just not during the week of the readathon. And the Anita Blake series is a adult urban fantasy series that follows our main character of Anita, who is a necromancer, or animator they call them. They raise zombies, and she's also a professional vampire hunter, and she teams up with the paranormal police force a lot and gets pulled into a lot of different things. These books are some of my favorites, and I've reread these numerous times, so this is one that I had reread. What's so fun about these is I listen to this on audio, and I think the audiobooks are great, and there's so many things that I had forgotten, but there's like key moments that I remember, and there were some moments in here that I was like, ooh, I really remember that, like viscerally. I will say, be prepared for these books if you do go into them, that they're borderline, like not quite horror, but they have horror themes to them, because this is a world that has fae, vampires, werewolves, everything, zombies, like everything. So you have a lot of that, but there is a lot of gore that happens in this. This book was like particularly gory, I would say. I've read them so many times that I'm fine with it, but be ready for that. Also, one of the villains in this is a pedophilic vampire. So be also aware of that. You don't get anything on page, but it is talked about. So I would say if you go into really any urban fantasy book, to check your trigger warnings, because there's typically a lot. There's a lot of usually darker content in urban fantasy. Of the ones that I've reread recently, this one was probably my least favorite. There are some interesting plot points that happen for like the meta plot, like the bigger plot point, but I would say overall, like the actual monster of the week, because almost each book with this has almost like a monster of the week going on. The actual monster of the week of this one, I really didn't like that much, didn't find very interesting or compelling, but I still really like our characters. This took Anita away from the main area that she's in, and so we didn't necessarily get a lot with all these different characters that we tend to see. I like the installments of this that have like a lot of the like recurring characters in here, and there was a few, but not as many as we usually get. So I didn't like this one quite as much. So I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and most of the ones I've been rereading have been like a 4 to 4.5. But this still does some things to push along the meta plot, and I will be continuing with this series to eventually catch up to book like 30 or whatever that we're on. But yeah, that is it for all the books that I read in March. Like I said, for 3 weeks, that was like a really decent reading month. So comment below, let me know what you read in March. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.